Notes were being taken. When a family who are adjusting to the realisation of a challenging diagnosis come into contact with the services of the state, they should assume a culture of partnership, of compassion, of care. But notes were being taken. They fear for their child because of an autism diagnosis. How will they navigate the world? Will they have to endure prejudice, misunderstanding, isolation? Who will partner with us to empower them? They asked themselves. But notes were being taken. Parents hear of long waiting lists, 18, 19 months for an assessment of need, 35, 36, 40 months for some essential interventions. Why do they count these times in months? 36 months is 3 years. They ask these questions at night, heartbroken at the sight of their sleeping 3-year-old who will be 6 by the time their country comes to their aid. But notes were being taken. In rooms where the compassion of the state should have been most manifest, notes were being taken to add to a dossier that would be used in a court case. If you were so exhausted and frustrated by the failures of this country to empower your child that you turned to the legal route, they would turn to their notes. A dossier not just on you, but on your whole family. The revelations from the Primetime Investigates programme earlier this month exposed the culture of confrontation that emanates from the corridors of the permanent government. Notes were being taken. Yes, the exposé was shocking, but somehow, ironically, completely unsurprising, because no one who has ever had to embark on this adventure with their autistic child would in any way be surprised at the culture, the systematic failures and the institutionalised obstacles we promote as a child-centred approach. No Western democracy would attempt to stand over such pathetic waiting lists. No genuine republic would force parents to go on a hopeless merry-go-round trip of local schools in order to access a place for their child. And no country with aspirations for all their children would force families to the courts when they try to vindicate their rights and then reach into a filing cabinet or download a file within which is a dossier that was compiled by taking notes. So today, we in the Labour Party want the government to take note. We want Dáil Éireann to take note. We want the citizens of this country to take note. Autistic people are a gift, an inspiration, a guiding light for all of us. We are enhanced, we are empowered, we are enlightened by them. Their potential is limitless. All they need is a society willing to listen, willing to learn, willing to love, and willing to empower, willing to take note of who they are. There was a man over 100 years ago who took notes. He took notes for an address that he would never make during a struggle and a time after which he would be long forgotten. His name was Tom Johnston, the leader of the Labour Party in 1919. He was entrusted with the honour of scripting the democratic programme of the first Dáil. And as voices like his struggled to be heard over the sound of gunshots from the men and women of war and of flags, he wrote of the children. In his well-crafted notes, he wrote, "The Irish Republic shall always count its wealth and prosperity by the measure of health and happiness of its citizens. It shall therefore be the first duty of the government of the Republic to make provision for the physical, mental and spiritual well-being of the children, to ensure that no child shall suffer hunger or cold from lack of food, clothing or shelter, that all shall be protected with ample means and facilities requisite for the education and training of free citizens in a free Gaelic nation. A condition precedent to such education is to encourage by every reasonable means the most capable, sympathetic men and women to devote their talents to the education of the young." We should reflect on the notes he took, the words he used: health, happiness, physical, mental and spiritual well-being, the need for sympathetic men and women to devote their talents to the education of the young. This is the founding document of our state, of this Oireachtas. It is said of Tom Johnston that he wept openly when he heard those words read aloud, as he had written them in his notes. Have we failed that aspiration, that purely Republican aspiration for the well-being of the children, of the sympathy, of the understanding, the compassion of that same state? As today these children try to find their voice between the flag wavers and the tax cutters, they now need to be empowered. We need a national autism empowerment strategy to correct the mistakes of this state and to embed here the international best practice of others. The Maltese Autism Act is a template that this country should work from, an act in its citation which seeks to, and I quote, to empower persons within the autism spectrum by providing for their health and well-being in society, the betterment of their living conditions, their participation and inclusion in society, and to make ancillary and consequential provisions thereto in full adherence to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Again, those words, as if inspired by Tom Johnson: health, well-being, inclusion, betterment. It is an act of empowerment, an act of defiance that in the face of generations of misunderstanding, prejudice and underfunding, autistic people are now ready to defy the odds, defy the history of their state and defy the expectations of their country to live full, productive, healthy and love-filled lives. We should compare notes with Malta. At the heart of the Maltese legislative achievement and at the heart of our motion is accountability. It's what parents are crying out for: accountability of service providers, accountability when mistakes are made and when gaps need to be filled, accountability to this House, to Dáil Éireann. These are the notes that the Minister and the Government needs to take. Take note from Malta. Take note from the advocacy groups and parents' associations who are crying out for the state to take some of the burden in this empowerment process. Groups like those in Dublin 6 and Dublin 6 West, who are working with Senator Ivana Bacik. Groups like those in Dublin 12, who I have met with Senator Rebecca Moynihan, who are changing the world for their children. The children I've met in my own constituency, like James Field and Abigail Cahill, who have changed my entire understanding of the world in which they live. Listen to groups like As I Am, who empowered us in the Labour Party to script this motion today. It is not right that parents feel they are at war with their own government, with their own state. It is exhausting, humiliating and defeating. Phone call after phone call, letter after letter, referral after referral, waiting list after waiting list, school after school, all the while notes are being taken. For the last number of days, we have been flooded with stories from all over the country which should shame us all. The mother in Limerick who has been told there is no local school place for her child, who travels to Nina twice a day, a total of 184 kilometres every day, because the transport needs for her child still have not been resolved. Why should that mother believe that anyone cares? How can she possibly believe in this republic as she drives past schools that can't take her child in her own car because the transport hasn't been arranged to a town in another county 46 kilometres away? Simply because her child is autistic. Many wonder if it is because of notes that the state is slow to respond. Euro notes. But millions of those euro notes could be saved by empowering our autistic citizens. The money you think you are saving by hoping parents will access private assessments or therapy is pittance in comparison to the money saved by preventing the vulnerability of a young person with autism. Because yes, they are more likely to enter homelessness. Yes, they are more likely to experience unemployment. Yes, they are more likely to fall prey to addiction. If you think empowerment is expensive, try disempowerment. But there is hope, there is ambition, there is vision, there is empowerment, and we ask of government to support our motion today. An empowerment strategy that focuses not just on health and education, but on housing, transport and employment too. We say to the autistic children, autistic young people, and autistic women and men of Ireland, there is a reason why autism sounds like awesome. We say to you, strike your own note, sing your own song, play your own instrument, your own way, in your own time, march to the beat of your own drum. We need you. We celebrate you. You empower us. We will empower each other. We say to your families, you are not raising your child to be a second-class citizen. We will not permit it. We commend this motion for a national autism empowerment strategy to the House. It is time to stop taking notes. It's time, Minister, to take action.
Good Doctor Ellen Kelly.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, this is one of the most important issues we can deal with. I'm delighted and also shocked that your government has actually accepted our motion today, because it is an incredibly important motion. It's something we fundamentally believe in, but also it is a motion that's very critical of your government. So in that sense, I'm delighted you've accepted that criticism. I want to start my contribution by telling a story, powerful, written by a parent of an autistic young kid. I can see Sarah is excited, and as I collect her from school. She squeezes my hand and tells me she has been invited to a birthday party. Sarah is 7 and has autism. This is the first time since starting school she's been invited to a party. Molly from our class put invitations in all the school bags, Sarah tells me. We get to the car and Sarah starts searching her school bag, but can't find the invitation. So I start searching too, and realise after emptying the bag that I shouldn't have. I see Sarah's face drop as reality sinks in. I hug her as she sobs and explain that maybe Molly could only invite 1 or 2 girls. Maybe Molly forgot to put the invitation in her bag. We both know this is unlikely. But I have to try and say something to make my girl feel less hurt and rejected. This story was outlined in a recent article by Lara Mullins from NUI Galway on RT1. It is a truly painful story every time I read it, but a very common story, one which many parents of autistic children will recognise, and it encapsulates the hurt, the rejection, the social exclusion, the suffering, and the constant trials which autistic children and their parents must endure because they're excluded for no other reason than being absolutely brilliant. The truth is that the state, which is the very entity which should be standing up for our own autistic citizens and their rights in our society, appears to be hell-bent on the exclusion of autistic children and their parents from that same society. Whether it's keeping dossiers on children for use in court proceedings, or the state breaking its own laws by having waiting lists for assessment of needs that are on average over 3 times longer than what is required by state, or whether it is the adversarial approach which they have taken to the autistic community again and again and again, the state continues to be in dereliction of its duty to its own citizens. The state's treatment of autistic citizens is a stain on our republic that can't continue, Minister. As a result of this failure, because the state has failed to provide the support it should to autistic citizens, stories like Sarah's are repeated all over the country on a daily basis. Stories of exclusion, stories of hurt and isolation and despair. The Labour Party is bringing this motion to the Dáil tonight because we want this Dáil to declare this evening that when it comes to how the shameful way in which this state has treated its autistic citizens, enough is enough. That once and for all, autistic children, autistic adults and their families deserve to be fully included in Irish society and to get the support they need from the state to make this happen. We in the Labour Party are standing by autistic citizens, young and old, and their families. In advance of tabling this motion, we asked for people to tell us their stories of what it's like to be autistic in Ireland. One submission is as follows. I was diagnosed age 6 and my parents had to go private for it. Autism is a very stigmatised condition, so I do not usually disclose it. I was bullied at school because of it. The special needs classes I attended were not aimed at my needs specifically, so did more harm than good. They were also scheduled at the same time as Irish, despite not being exempt because of the belief gap in education with autistic people. Autism is used as a pejorative by a lot of people, which hurts too. Your abilities are often doubted as an autistic person, and this can be patronising a lot. I have comorbid hypomania and low muscle tone and Tourette syndrome. I have difficulty with walking long distances, writing and other physical activities, and I get back and leg pain because the hypomania was not properly treated with occupational therapy and physio as a child. It is not curable, but I would have a lot less difficulty now if I had to receive those services in time. We in the Labour Party have listened to so many stories such as this, stories of autistic citizens being failed again and again. This is why we are tonight demanding radical change in how this state supports its autistic citizens. In our motion, we are demanding that the government produce a national autism empowerment strategy by the end of July, and that it establishes an Irish Autism Advisory Council modelled on what is working in Malta. We are calling it an empowerment strategy very deliberately, because it is time that the state and wider Irish society recognise the unique talents, gifts and perspectives which autistic citizens can bring to dealing with problems we face. We want autistic children and adults to feel included, involved and empowered as members of Irish society because of the many gifts which they have. And for anyone listening who doubts what I am saying or doubts the huge potential which people on the autism spectrum have and can offer to society, perhaps it is time to herald a list of people from history who are either confirmed or strongly suspected of having been on the autism spectrum. This is done by Michael Fitzgerald, Professor of Psychiatry at TCD. The long list includes Albert Einstein, Isaac Newton, George Orwell, Beethoven, Hans Christian Andersen and Immanuel Kant, all on the autism spectrum. Another was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, whose hearing was famously so delicate that loud sounds would make him physically ill, a telltale indicator of being on the autism spectrum. The list goes on and on. Labour wants this Dáil this evening to adopt this motion to send a message to our autistic citizens and their families that they are valued, that they belong, and that they have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful contribution to make to Irish society, and that the manner in which the state has been treating them has been wrong, and it will change. It will change now for the better. We understand that the government are not going to oppose this motion this evening, which we welcome. And we welcome that by accepting this motion, the government are committing here and now, tonight, to putting in place the National Autism Empowerment Strategy by the end of July, which this motion calls for. If the government do not follow through on this, considering they did not oppose this motion, then they are letting all of these citizens down. Do not let these citizens down. They've been let down too long, Minister. We also take from the government agreeing to this motion that they are now committing to establishing an Irish Autism Advisory Council. In the Minister's response, I wanted to confirm those things, because if the government accepts this motion this evening but fails to implement the National Autism Empowerment Strategy or fails to establish an Irish Autism Advisory Council, the government will be failing all of our autistic citizens. By accepting this motion, the government are also finally admitting that they have failed autistic families by the waiting lists that are so long, and they are also admitting that the internal Department of Health report on the compilation of dossiers on autistic children was unacceptable, and we look forward to the government shortly initiating a review which is commissioned by a body other than the Department of Health, as the motion calls for. In the time remaining, I want to acknowledge that we have serious problems when it comes not just to the assessments and needs, but, Minister, also the way in which the rollout of ASD units happens in this country. There are so many gaps. I have had to fight and fight and fight to get ASD units into my hometown of Neenah, where until recently, in the second largest town in Tipperary, and the largest in North Tipperary, there wasn't one in the actual town. That's not good enough. And by the way, this is replicated in loads of other places around the country. I want to acknowledge the work of As I Am and Adam Harris and his team. I want to acknowledge the work that has been done in relation to making Clonakilty Ireland's first autism-friendly town. About a year and a half ago, I called a meeting in Neenah to turn Neenah into an autism-friendly town. I expected maybe a dozen people. A couple of hundred people turned up or were in touch. We have formed a committee. Martin Slattery is our chairperson. Emma Byrne is our secretary. Louise Morgan Walsh, Noel Brohan, Caroline Bracken Murphy, and the amazing Nick Ryan Purcell. I would encourage everyone to get involved across the country in setting up such groups, because the changes that it brings about are incredible. And it ensures that people with autism know there is a friendly environment in which they will evolve, they will grow, and they will be part of a community that embraces them. And I want to end tonight by acknowledging the incredible work of Nicholas Ryan Purcell. His film, Living with Autism, released in February 2019, had an incredible impact for people with autism in this country. And I would ask everyone to look at this. So, Minister, I welcome the fact you're accepting our motion. It is an incredibly important motion, but we will be following up, and we'll know if you mean what you say by July of this year. Thank you.
Dr. Kelly, Anish and Auireachtas, and Minister Ryan Rabbit has 7 minutes, sharing with Deputy Michael Moynihan 1.5 and Deputy Pádraig O'Sullivan 1.5. Tara, at all.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to start by thanking the Labour Party for bringing this motion here this evening. And I want to acknowledge that I am joined by Minister O'Gorman here as well this evening. In September last year, I spoke in the House of my vision for the provision of disability services for all people of all ages in the coming years. My vision is ambitious, and I make no apology for that. People with special needs deserve nothing less than the best services that the state can provide. The discussion this evening focuses on a number of strands, including health, equality, education and inclusion. It shows that every person in society, regardless of whether they have a disability, is valued and must be given every possible opportunity and support to realise their potential. It is quite fitting, given that April is World Autism Month, that the House has an opportunity to debate the matters raised by this private member's motion this evening. On assuming ministerial responsibility for disability, one of the issues I sought to remedy was the number of overdue assessment of needs for children across the country. At the end of June 2020, the backlog, for a number of reasons, had risen to approximately 6,500. By working with Minister Donnelly, I secured a funding of £7.8 million to address this issue, and I am pleased to inform the House today that by the end of last month, we have reduced the waiting list to approximately 1,860 cases. This is a reduction of over 70%. I have to thank the HSE, its staff, clinicians around the country on the impressive results. And it is important to note as well that this progress continues to be made despite the challenges posed by the current pandemic. Even more importantly, the clearing of this backlog will allow services to focus on intervention to support the child, which is the key piece. Ensuring these therapies can be delivered in the timeliest way is where Progressing Disability Services for Children and Young People programme, or PDS as we know it, comes. This will completely change how we deliver services and supports for children from birth to 18 years of age. The HSE is establishing a total of 91 children's disability networks across the 9 CHOs. To date, 41 of these network teams are already in place, and with a handful of managers just left to be appointed. Under PDS, these teams will provide specialist support services for all children with significant disabilities, regardless of their diagnosis, where they live or where they go to school. It would also mean the end of the unacceptable situation where children can age out of early intervention teams, and will also help tackle the current waiting list, which we all know are at an unacceptable level. In relation to existing school-based therapy posts, I have requested that the HSE pause the removal of these therapist posts to allow for additional engagement at local and national level to ensure full clarity for all stakeholders. Another important step is the recruitment of an additional therapists, which I secured for 100, which will have already started recruitment for. At the start of this month, I announced our intention to develop an autism innovation strategy under the remit of the Department of Children, Disability, Equality and Integration. The focus of the strategy is the short term will be to deliver real and tangible solutions to the challenges, needs and experiences of autistic people in a number of key areas. I know that there have been questions about what does innovation mean and why innovation over empowerment. For me, these are both interlinked. The 4 key pillars of the strategy will be health, education, employment and housing. And the aim of this strategy is for each pillar to pinpoint and to develop innovations in these areas that can help empower people with autism. So to the Labour Party I say, in my last number of months, I have been taking notes. As I see it, you can't achieve empowerment without action, and these innovations will help make up these actions. And this is why I've put the focus on the innovations, as without them, you can't deliver on empowerment. I'm really excited about this autism innovation strategy and what hopefully it will achieve. And the first step is to establish a working group for the strategy, which I will chair. This group will begin the planning of the strategy and identify the key innovations to be included. This process will require a cross-departmental approach, and I look forward to working with my ministerial colleagues across government on these. Most importantly, though, this strategy to be successful, stakeholder consultation is vital. We need people with the lived experience to help inform where and what actions are needed. And I can assure this House that meaningful stakeholder engagement will be the cornerstone of this process. I can also confirm that I hope to initiate the expressions in the next month. I also welcome this opportunity this evening to announce a new autism initiative I have been developing with the HSE over the last number of months. Later this year, we will be establishing an autism phone helpline on a pilot basis, and I think it will be a huge support to autistic people of all ages. Once in operation, the phone line will aim to answer general questions about autism, highlight where and how you can access support services in an individual's local area, talk through how to go about explaining autism to other people, as well as providing information on how to access welfare services, community healthcare and employment, and so on. I look forward to working with the HSE Autism Programme Board on the delivery of this, and want to thank in particular Breda Crehan-Roach and Bernard O'Regan for their support for me over the last number of months on working on this. This government is fully committed to the principles of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that relate to the participation and involvement of people with disabilities and their representative organisation in the development of this policy. The recently established Disability Participation and Consultation Network has been created for the very purpose. I would note that the network's memberships include people with autism and organisations representative of people with autism, as I am as a grant-funded member of the network and central to its operation. In respect of the motion's call in regard of legislation, as the deputies will be aware, work is advancing to commence the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act 2015 by June 2022. And it was great to be part of the recent Decision Support Services event earlier this month. Improving disability services for all children with additional needs is a priority for this government. I am confident that this process is well underway and that we are working our way towards a place where services are readily accessible for all children and young people who need them at any stage of their lives. I have taken note. Thank you.
And Tara Anish and Deputy Micheál Moynihan.
Thank you very much. And I am taking the remainder of the time
right, lad.
So now I welcome the opportunity to speak on the debate. There's a number of issues. I suppose it is timely and it is important, and it is crucially important during the month of April that we're having this debate on autism and how we go forward. And I think that it is refreshing to see that the Minister's commitment to accepting this motion tonight and accepting that we are in a very difficult position from get-go, and that putting huge effort into it. There's a couple of things. The pausing of the withdrawal of the speech and language and occupational therapy from special schools that was muted and was being discussed has been paused, and we welcome that initiative by the Minister and the HSE. Where now it's being paused is what was said. What is happening next? Are they going to retain those services of occupational therapists and speech and language therapists within the special schools? It is crucially important that they are maintained within the schools. That is the structure for them, not to have them off-site, not to have further transport issues or other issues in it. And I appeal to the Minister to ensure that the pausing, which I welcome, becomes permanent. I also want to look at a whole raft of issues that are there. You know, the transport issue, the state services in providing transport. There are structures there for transport, and they should be delivered. You know, it hasn't to be the management of the school or the parents or the advocates on behalf of the parents and the public representatives having to constantly be on to the Department of Education in relation to transport issues. They should be rolled out. The challenges that are there for people with disabilities and special needs, there should be an effort or an attitude by the state to break down the barriers, to make it easier for them to access information and to access supports, rather than making it more difficult. What we have done as a state is that collectively and individually we have it made more difficult, and there's an attitude there that has to change. And I firmly believe that if we are today at this debate, if we take it collectively in this House and say we are changing the attitude by the state to families and people who have disabilities, it would be a massive step forward. It would be a psychological step forward and stop the issues in relation to what has been exposed over the last while. But it is important that that attitude takes place. And I think in our committee, on the Disabilities Committee, we have a fantastic group of people working together, and their attitude is firmly to bring forward ideas to make it better for the lived experience of people with disabilities, their lives, and those that live with them. Good morning,
Maha go to talk to mine and ish and party like Deno Maid and Deputy Sean Sherlock and Deputy Duncan Smith, 5 minutes each.
Thank you, Cahir. Look, I welcome the fact that my party is putting forward this motion here tonight, and I welcome the fact that Minister Rabbitte is here before us tonight as well to address the issues specifically, and as is her colleague, Minister O'Gorman. I want to start with the figure of 1,860 cases that the Minister has referred to. I just would wish the Minister to respond, perhaps when the Government is responding to this issue, because I've received figures dated the 8th of April in relation to applications that are overdue for completion for assessment of needs, which tell me that a total overdue is 5,078 people. So there seems to be, on the face of it, a contradiction between what the Minister is proposing here tonight in relation to the numbers that are waiting and figures that have been supplied by the HSC to me as of the 8th of April in respect of the numbers waiting. It's a major issue. 5,078 children overdue for an assessment of needs. And if the Minister could respond to that, I would be very grateful, because if such progress is being made such that there are 1,860 cases, then that indeed would be significant progress. But I'm sure the Minister will forgive me if and I don't wish to be cynical, but I would question those figures that have been presented to us tonight, and I would like to seek further clarity on that. We are left in a situation where we have to put forward this motion tonight because there are thousands upon thousands of children throughout the state who still do not have access to follow-on services. And if you run through, for instance, the audiology, the number of patients under the age of 18 waiting for treatment in February 2021 was 9,486. In the community health organisations, which are the individual organisations which govern the various parts of the country, in the Cork and Kerry region of CHO4, Community Health Organisation 4, there are 2,118 people waiting for audiology follow-on services. That's CHO4, Cork and Kerry region. For occupational therapy, 18,753 in CHO Laois Offaly, Longford, Westmeath and Loudmead, which is the highest. That's 3,760 children waiting for services. For dietetics, the number of children waiting for treatment in February 2021 is 4,232. The highest area is South Tipperary, Carlow, Kilkenny, Waterford and Wexford, which has a waiting list of 1,174. These are all children. They're all individuals, little and older, people, young people. They're all under the age of 18. Ophthalmology, the number of children waiting for treatment in February 2021 is 14,000 approximately, and the highest area there is Galway, Roscommon and Mayo. That's 4,842 people waiting for services for ophthalmology, for follow-on services. For physiotherapy, it's 10,000 as of February 2021. And again, the highest area is Kildare, West Wicklow, Dublin West, Dublin City South and Dublin South West. That's CHO and that's 2,600 approximately. So I do appreciate the point that the Minister is making in relation to the focus on the assessment of needs. And I do appreciate the progress that has been made. And we do absolutely acknowledge the fact that Minister Rabbitte actually is the first minister to have come along in a number of years who has tackled, I would say, the HSE and the lethargy within the HSE in respect of this issue. And I find it extraordinary that we now live in a time where a minister has to push back against officials within the HSE who do not want to deliver these services and will find every excuse not to. So we wish her well in that regard. But we want to continue to speak for children. This is about children, and we need to ensure that, notwithstanding the arguments that have been made in relation to the assessment of needs and the methodologies which have been critiqued by psychologists in relation to how that list has been dramatically reduced. If you accept the fact that they have been reduced, and if you take that at face value, there is still the massive issue of the follow-on services. And €7.8 million was spent on this, and I welcome the fact that the ministers were able to secure this. But €8.7 million, €8.7 million was spent on Deloitte, Ernst & Young, KPMG and PwC for consultancy services during the course of the pandemic, and it was given over by the HSE. That's as a parliamentary question that I received last week. So I would say that we need to start prioritising things within the HSE. Thank you, Chair.
And talk to Duncan Smith. That's all.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak in a moment about the impact that the pandemic has had, particularly on children with autism. But just in response to your speech, Minister, there's one bit that leaped out at me as something that's very positive, because it reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine a number of years ago now. I think I just started as a counsellor, so it would have been 2014, around then. And his son has autism. And he was asking me, as someone with vim, vigour and gusto just starting out local life, he said, what are you going to do in terms of autism? And I asked him about his experience, and he said, well, I didn't know where to start. He said, I just didn't know what the first step was. So when I was listening to your speech, and on page 7 of the printed copy, you talk about the Autism Phone Helpline coming out as a pilot basis. And this, if it works, will be very, very important, because people need a first step before they make any other steps after. And that's not to say every other step after is going to be easy. It won't, because that conversation and subsequent conversations I've had with my friend has been all about how difficult things are, how everything's a fight. But that first step was the most difficult. So that's really encouraging to hear that that's coming on board, and to read what it hopes to achieve. That people will know where to go. That if they have concerns or they have worries, that they have a starting point, and from then hopefully the journey will be easier than it has been for so many people, because it has been difficult. And this past year with the pandemic, and we all get up here every week and we say, you know, this cohort of people or this industry, and everyone's had it difficult. But there's been very fascinating research conducted by DCU in the last year, which I'm sure you're aware of. It's from August last year. 74% of parents of a child with ASD reported that they would be faced with unique challenges over the weeks as the restrictions were lifted. And this was as restrictions were being lifted back then, and so we can look to that now as happening again. Due to these past months of limited social interactions, some face difficulties with social skills, and skills may have since regressed, and regression being a major problem with the pandemic. The changing environments that people will have to go into now, because as restrictions are eased, we're not going back to the same, we're going back to a different way of doing things, with masks, with distances, with different sets of rules. And these are things we really have to be cognizant of. You know, when many of us are complaining about what are minor and petty inconveniences, for others, they are huge life-changing challenges, and we need to be cognizant of that and to support it. And from the same research, we know that there's been a 61% decline in relation to certain abilities and skills. And parents who took part in the research noted that in 31% of children, a decline in their ability to self-regulate their emotions. So there's huge impact that this pandemic is having, that parents are seeing and families are seeing now, but that we as a society probably won't see until these restrictions are lifted, and we really need to be so sensitive and cognizant to them. The shift to online learning in the past year has presented significant challenges for children and families, especially for families with autistic children, who often struggle with these changes in routine and the engagement required for remote instruction. 18% reported that children were experiencing a decline in motivation to engage in activities, including schoolwork. The periods of necessary school closures and this move to online or home learning stuff is a vast shift in environment and routine that one can almost expect negative change in these abilities. So when we say now that we're going to be living in a world of Zoom and Teams and whatever, and that this is a new way of doing things, that might be easy for us. It might make life a bit more convenient for us, but it might be, and is, a lot more inconvenient and a lot more difficult for people with autism, and particularly for children with autism. So these things that are maybe inconsequential to us are huge to other people, and we need to be cognizant of that. Thank you, Minister, and thank you.
Good. Talk to Anish on part of Sinn Féin, and I have a number of deputies. Deputies Kathleen Function, 5 minutes. Deputy Violet Han Wynne, 3 no made. Deputy Martin Brown, 3 no made. Deputy Pauline Tuffy, 3 no made. Deputy Dizzy Ellis, 3 no made. August Deputy Circle Clark, 3 no made. Anish, right, this Deputy Function.
Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. I just want to say that we're happy to support the motion. I just want to thank our colleagues in the Labour Party as well for bringing this forward. I was delighted to hear the Minister mention the autism strategy. Sometimes I wonder whatever happened to that. People probably will remember and are probably not shocked that I'm going to bring up that 2 years ago exactly on World Autism Day in 2019 we did have a motion that I had brought forward, and it was passed unanimously in the Dáil to develop an autism strategy, and that is so important. It's been missing from this country for a long time. Now, I will say that it was my understanding, and it still is, that we were supposed to have a committee, an Oireachtas committee, in place for about 6 months to look at the issue so that there could actually be hearings in public in relation to consultation. And I think that's really important that still does take place, because that is the way forward. I think one of the ways forward, one step, and let's just say it is only one step and one small step. The issue of autism, I think all of us are contacted on a regular basis by various families who are struggling, who maybe have a child who they believe might have autism. They're going through the process of waiting for an assessment, or maybe they've just received that assessment. And I don't think we can say it often enough that absolutely everything that has to be done is a battle. And that is just completely wrong. And I feel like, when you describe something as a crisis, it's fine to describe it as a crisis if it's happening for a certain short period of time and it was unforeseen. This is happening for years now in this country, so we can't describe it as a crisis. We know this is happening. We know that children who have autism, who cannot get an ASD class, who maybe can get an ASD class, but it's miles away from their home, they can't get transport, and you have to actually question, how fair and how realistic it is to ask a child to be taking a really long bus journey to and from school every single day. That's not, we know this is happening. It's children, I believe firmly, and I really strongly believe in this, that children who are diagnosed with autism are treated as second-class citizens. They can't get, the services that they need, speech and language, occupational therapy, class places, school transport, additional help in school. It's totally wrong and unfair that maybe it's based on, you might meet somebody on the day that is willing to listen and be on board and, be a help and support to people. And you will often find people will say only for such and such a person. Like, we have an excellent social worker in Kilkenny that is involved with the early intervention team. And time again, people say to me, only for this person, they would be lost. And it shouldn't be based on that. It should be based on these are rights that people have and they need to be respected. And I don't know how many debates we have to have in here for people to realise and for the government to realise. And I know and I accept, I actually agree with the point that Deputy Sherlock made in relation to yourself, Minister. I genuinely believe you want to do the right thing and have been trying to do the right thing. But we really, really need to see action. We can't have the waiting lists. First of all, for the assessment, and then you go on to a waiting list for occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech and language, and parents are literally tearing their hair out trying to do their best for the children. And then you get to the stage where, you know, an ASD preschools, we very rarely talk about them because they're so rare. We have one ASD preschool for the whole of the county of Kilkenny, that's city and county. It's absolutely, you know, totally unacceptable. And then you get into school, there's a battle there. Then you go on to secondary school, you know, a real serious battle. And to get extra additional help maybe for exam time, you have to have a diagnosis on paper. There's also an issue where some people might have a certain diagnosis on paper, they're in mainstream school, then that's not suiting. They have to go back to the drawing board, go back to step one all over again to get a different diagnosis, maybe to get into an ASD class or an ASD school. You know, like, it's not rocket science. There is so many groups and so many parents and so many people that can actually tell us how to do this, how to do it correctly. And that's why the Autism Empowerment Strategy is so, so important, and it works so well in other countries. And we need to start looking at that, and we need to start ensuring. I didn't even get a chance to touch on the adult services, but that's another battle when you go from, you know, maybe school age into adult services, if you are lucky to have an adult service in your area that you can access. So there is a huge job of work to do, and I think it's good that we're having the debate, and I really hope that we see some action from it. Thanks, Cairloch.
Good morning, good, and talk to function Anish and talk to Violet and when.
So this motion is a matter very close to my heart as a parent of a child with autism. So today I speak as Teachta, but also as a mother directly impacted by this matter. The provision for autism services, and by that I mean the distinct lack of provision for autism services, is one of the main reasons that I felt compelled to enter the political domain in the first place. As a parent, and any parent will know this, you want to protect your children and surround them with as much love and support as possible, and therefore it's heart-wrenching to watch your child struggle, to watch them suffer or unable to enjoy their lives fully. As a parent, you know you can't right every wrong, but to live in a society where your government just does not get it and consistently does not prioritise autism services is insult to injury. When, for example, a motion is brought forward, as was done in 2019 by my colleague Deputy Function on the Autism Empowerment Strategy, a motion that was the result of significant research drawn on proven international best practice models and approaches, in particular an Empowerment Act 2016 brought into effect in Malta, which established a National Autism Advisory Council. Deputy Function's motion then set out a clear framework to take equivalent progressive strides in our society, including the establishment of an all-party Oireachtas committee, which will be mandated to produce an autism empowerment strategy for Ireland within 6 months. That motion was passed with strong cross-party support at the time, yet the committee was never established. And what message did that send? That vote was not followed through with action, and that is the recurrent theme here, Minister, and it cannot continue. This leaves people furious and frustrated, and rightly so. Their government has failed them time and time again. The very political system set up to protect their interests denies them their rights, and it needs to stop. Just looking at the waiting times for the assessment of needs for children in this state, a European-wide study on autism spectrum disorders and early intervention published in 2018 identified that 50% of parents have access to intervention within 1 to 3 months after diagnosis. Meanwhile, our average waiting time to even access an assessment is a whopping 19 months, an indictment on the state failing drastically short of the time parameters set out in the Disability Act 2005, which is now 16 years old and is still not fully commenced. Again, the recurrent theme, Minister. Time is moving on, but we are not. What, Minister, is the point of law if it is not applied? The Ombudsman for Children's 2020 report entitled Unmet Needs has re-articulated the urgent need of the commencement of this Act Act, as well as changes to be made to the Education of the Persons with Special Education Needs Act 2004, which is also 17 years old, and it has not been fully implemented. In a joint Oireachtas meeting discussing this report, my colleague Dr. Ward raised a point that in the north, in Derry for example, children are given intervention in the interim while they wait assessment. So their developmental needs don't pay the price of the inefficiency of the state. All of Ireland's children should be treated equally. Sin a will.
Cormac, go and talk to Nish and talk to Martin Brown. 3 no made.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on this important matter here this evening, Minister. The challenges facing people with autism has been raised by Sinn Féin on a number of occasions. 2 years ago, Sinn Féin made a number of proposals for an autism strategy. This included the need for a specific autism committee. But here we are again, pressing the government to stop failing families across the country. Since then, the obstacles facing people with autism have become even more pronounced. This is evident as we deal with consequences of COVID and the recent revelations how the Department of Health has been collecting secret dossiers on the families of children with autism who had taken legal cases against them. Indeed, I have been dealing with a number of cases in which parents are facing roadblocks in getting assessments for their children. One parent who contacted me earlier this year told me of the difficulties she encountered in getting her child assessed for ASD. The parent in question was trying to get her child treated through CAMS for a separate issue, but she faced a situation when she had to get her child assessed to rule out ASD before CAMS would even entertain having him on their books. This was roadblock number 1. The second obstacle this parent encountered was in getting an appointment. When she got in contact with me, she told me that his public assessment would not have taken place until September 2021 at the earliest. So ultimately, to ensure that her son could get the services, she needed to get him assessed for ASD privately at a cost of €2,000. This is not an isolated case. But when I inquired, the HSE pointedly told me that children do not have to have private ASD assessments, but that some families may elect to seek a private assessment. With all due respect, Minister, parents in this situation do not elect to seek a private assessment. They find themselves with little or no choice but to do so because the waiting lists are so long and time is of the essence when it comes to their child. This was completely disingenuous response from the HSE. The legal requirement to carry out an assessment of need within 6 months is not being taken seriously. As a result, the waiting list is now at 19 months. I must tell you, Minister, people are sick and tired of facing roadblock after roadblock in regards to this. And as this motion points out, the delays that have resulted from COVID has been made an already bad situation even worse. And this is why. From speaking to autism support workers, I can tell you this. They feel that it is only when something focuses attention on the needs of people with autism and their families that they get heard. Many feel that most of the time the shortcomings in services are left in the lap of the gods. One worker said today that what is needed is ongoing active involvement on the part of the policy makers. They need to know that they are being listened to on an ongoing basis, but they must also have confidence that what they have to say is addressed and acted on. This is precisely the reason why this motion, like Sinn Féin's motions, are brought before the Dáil, because otherwise they would fall off the government agenda. I finally want to speak about the revelation that secret dossiers have been kept on the families of children with autism who have taken the legal cases. This motion calls for a full independent review to be carried out. I fully support this, and I'm of the view that there should be no shortcuts, no cases left unaddressed. In my view, the positive contribution that our autistic people make towards our society is not recognised and supported enough. But there are wonderful organisations out there who are embracing the talents of and the contribution autistic people make. Autism awareness. Yeah, in Rosgrey and in South Tipperary, autism are among them. But what they have become aware of is how to support their communities, show our organisations such as these fair outshines the level of commitment from the government. Cormac
and Dr. Pauline Tully.
I wish to fully support this motion brought forward by the Labour Party, for which I commend them, and it's a very important issue, and it's something that has been raised with, I'd imagine, every TD in this chamber. I want to raise some school-based issues around children with autism. Many children diagnosed with autism are given a place in an ASD unit or a special class, only to find that the person teaching them does not have a qualification in SEN. They're mainstream teachers. Some will try to learn and do additional courses in order to teach the children in the unit and meet their needs. However, frequently, by the time they've done the courses, they are moved into mainstream. classroom teaching and replaced by a different teacher who again is not qualified in SEN, and the whole process begins again. So in the meantime, the children are not being educated. I've been told that certain schools are saying to teachers, if you teach for 2 years in an ASD unit in our school, we'll guarantee you a permanent job in mainstream afterwards. Now, this is totally disgraceful. No one should be allowed to teach a special class or in an ASD unit unless they are fully and properly qualified in SEN. It's recently been brought to my attention also by a constituent who has 3 children with autism. The 3 of them are enrolled in a school approximately 30 minutes drive from her home, because at the time that her eldest child was ready to start school, there was no placement available in a special class or unit anywhere nearer to her. Transport is provided for her 2 eldest children to this school. However, when she applied for a ticket for her youngest child, she's been told that he doesn't qualify because he's not attending the nearest suitable school for him. Now, is this parent expected to send her children to different schools, which would mean that separate buses would have to call to bring them to separate schools? Now, how does that make any sense, common or financial? I've discussed the home tutor provision with tutors as well, many who have master and further qualifications in autism studies. Yet they are only given temporary teaching council numbers, and the teaching council is insisting that they must undertake and gain further qualifications in order to qualify for a teaching council number. The people I spoke to are highly qualified in their area. Can I ask that the Teaching Council includes qualification in autism studies as part of their criteria to obtain a Teaching Council number? Because it should be noted that anyone with a degree can obtain a teaching number on a temporary basis and give home tuition to a student with additional needs. I think that's extremely concerning, that the sector needs to be regulated. My other issue of concern is the fact that students have been expelled from special schools due to behavioural issues. Now, however, they are expelled without the school seeking the advice or the intervention of a behavioural analyst in order to deal with the issues and allow the child to continue his or her education in the school. So will the Department of Education now start to fund behavioural analysts and employ them to both work with staff in schools and with the students directly where there are behavioural issues? Thank you, Michaela.
Gormago talk to Nish and talk to Desiree Ellis, 308.
Gorau Mahagut. I would like to welcome this motion on a national empowerment strategy for autism, which I am happy to support. My constituency of Dublin North West has a high number of children and young people with autism, but a severe lack of services, resources, school places, and it being particularly acute at primary and secondary school level. The Sinn Féin team and I in Dublin North West are in contact with and have been assisting many parents from across the constituency with the problems they face getting proper access to school places and services for their children. From my meetings and conversations with parents, I'm very aware of the everyday challenges that they face. It is clear that there is a lack of leadership coming from the Department of Education and Skills and Special Educational Needs in determining the implementation, use and identification of resources for children with autism and special needs. We also need clarification on certain processes, which is lacking at the moment. In response to a question from my colleague Chris Andrews last October, asking to the Minister to outline the criteria used by the Department of Education and Skills in making a determination to use Section 37A of the Educational Act, the Minister in her response did not clarify as to what the actual mechanisms are for such a determination. According to Minister Madigan, the National Council for Special Education has the primary responsibility for coordinating and advising on the education provision for children nationwide. However, on the ground experience has shown that there appears to be no real strategy or planning that is based on any tangible data coming from the NCSE as to where, for example, ASD units are needed. Contrary to the Minister's assertions to my colleague, Deputy Andrews, in her response to him, there is no real engagement between the NCSE, parents and schools. This is probably why there are such huge gaps in the provision of services across Dublin North West. In fact, Ballymun is one of the worst served communities when it comes to autism and special needs and has no ASD units in primary schools. The Department and you, Minister, need to be proactive in that you should be the ones to make the determinations in respect of the provision of ASD units locally, because it appears that the current system is not working. Parents I have spoken to have also asked that Section 37A of the Educational Act be invoked to provide the necessary facilities in Dublin North West that are clearly lacking, and it is within your power to do so. And this situation in Dublin North West warrants such an intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Ellis. Deputy Clark.
I welcome the opportunity to speak on this issue. It affects thousands of families across the country. And I too, like my colleague Deputy Wynne, are proud to say that we are autism mammies. There's a perception out there that living with somebody with autism is a constant burden and that it's always difficult or always draining, and that's simply not true. People with autism are some of the most amazing people that you will meet, but they do face challenges on a daily basis. And the real difficulties don't come from a diagnosis or from the person themselves. They come from outside. It comes from a society that fails to fully understand what autism is, and a system that continually puts obstacles in their way. A system that, to some minds, is almost designed to stop these individuals from reaching their full potential. And that is an absolutely damning thing to have to say. But as a parent, I can tell you, I've seen it firsthand. I've walked that walk. I know what it's like. But when you take away somebody's avenues to success, you take away their power and you take away their voice. And that is absolutely unforgivable. What I will say to you, Minister, is this: if you are to focus on any area, focus on pathways to education, employment, healthcare and independent living. They are absolutely essential. So too are early assessments and integration at the most youngest age into our school system, and protect the rights of these people, whether it's in a school setting or in a workplace setting, because there is exploitation taking place out there. There is absolutely harassment taking place out there, and that needs to stop. I don't have time to go through the rest, but I will leave you with this thought. One of the most difficult conversations that I've ever had with another parent of an autistic child was one that started with her telling me that she couldn't go to bed. She couldn't go to bed because she didn't know how she was going to face the following day. That is the level of impact that a diagnosis of autism, or waiting on a diagnosis of autism, has on the parent of a child. Also, I've had conversations with grandparents from around the country, not my constituency, have rang looking for guidance. Is there a book out there? Is there something out there that can help us help our children in supporting their child? There is an absolute gap, Minister, and it needs to be filled. We can do better. We have to do better. And that begins by committing to ourselves that we will be better. Because no child, not mine nor Deputy Wynne's, deserves to be classed as a second-class citizen.
Thank you very much, Deputy Clark. We move now to the Social Democratic slot, and we'll hear Deputy Gary Gannon, please.
I'd like to begin by thanking the Labour Party for bringing forward this incredibly important private members' bill. I also want to thank the previous contributors for outlining their own personal experiences in the issue, and we, the Social Democrats, will be massively supportive of the bill, of the motion. An emerging theme in most of the contributions that I've been making in the Dáil here over the last couple of months has been on the issue of the things that we can't unsee from the pandemic. The inequalities and the inequities that were made too visible during the pandemic and too tangible for us to continue to ignore in our society. But tonight's PMB is somewhat different. Though people with autism have had an incredibly difficult time over the pandemic, routines and social structures are upended from the closure of schools and the removal of services. The eventual reopening of school buildings, which rightly prioritised students with disabilities, but wrongly which excluded students with disabilities in mainstream classes. Significant for children with autism because in 2017 NCSE estimated that 65% of children with autism in school were in mainstream classes. Or the incredible report of secret dossiers compiled and maintained by the Department of Health of sensitive and personal and private information on children with autism and their families. People with autism and their families suffered long before the pandemic, and they've had to fight for their very basic rights and entitlements. The relationship with the state has been unnecessarily fraught and adversarial for decades. As a country, we are consistently ranked amongst the lowest in Europe when it comes to people with disabilities experiencing underemployment and unemployment, risk to poverty and risk to social exclusion. And it is shameful but fitting that we were the very last EU member state to ratify the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2019, and that today many provisions within the Education for Persons with Special Education Need Act 2004 remain outstanding. For example, the Special Education Appeals Board, where decisions made about the education of people with special education needs can be appealed, was established in 2006, and yet the board is still not yet in operation. The way people with autism have been treated over the course of the pandemic is a continuation of collective experience that was ongoing pre-pandemic. I would say that any trust that existed between people with autism, their families and the state was fully broken when the practice of the Department of Health and the Department of Education compiling and upkeeping secret dossiers on children with autism and their families were reported in late March this year, thanks to the courageous actions of whistleblower Shane Carr. There is no trust that an internal review will be sufficient. How could it? Only an independent statutory investigation would be appropriate, and it needs to take place urgently, and I support completely the calls from family and advocacy charities such as As I Am and the Disability Federation of Ireland for nothing less than that to take place. The private member's bill references the incredible report by the Ombudsman for Children's Office, Unmet Needs, which was published last October, and I want to reference the stories of several individuals highlighted in this particular report. Lucy is non-verbal and has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder combined with mild general learning difficulties. She has a communication device, but neither Lucy nor her family have been taught how to use this device as yet, and she still continues to communicate using limited amounts of sign language. Lucy was recommended for speech and language therapy and physiotherapy in 2015 following an assessment of needs, but at the age of 11 years has still not received the clinical services recommended to her as a 6-year-old, a situation absolutely unbecoming of a modern republic. This report also highlights Andrew's story, whose mother was told he would have to wait a year for her son to access psychological assessment, impeding her ability to get access to the ASD specialist preschool for her son. Or Michael, who was non-verbal with suspected ASD and whose mother was told to go to the circuit court to force the HSE to implement the assessment after waiting 19 months for an assessment of needs. How many of us in this chamber have heard of similar experiences? Because what is extraordinary about the stories of Lucy, Andrew and Michael is just how common they are. Many times in this chamber, we are often accused of trying to point score and making things about politics that should be about people. The experiences of families and children across this country to get appropriate and timely diagnosis, intervention and support for us is not about point scoring. It should not be political. Every one of us who have made a representation for a family desperate to get an assessment of needs or get the services and support from an assessment know. All of us know the system, all of those in the system know that the system is broken and we need to stop equivocating. Parents have had to fight tirelessly and consistently against this state to get basic rights and support for their children. This is true in the case of healthcare, it's true in education and it's true in social protection. The Irish Examiner reported in early March 2021 that almost half of all applications last year for disability allowance were turned down, but almost 2/3 of appeals were later revised or granted. It seems entirely unnecessary that it has to be so difficult. In relation to the domiciliary care allowance, which only extends to children up to the age of 16 who have a disability which require ongoing care and attention, in 2019 more than 70% of families denied their initial application for the monthly domiciliary care allowance for their child had the decision overturned on appeal. And there were 3,630 appeals received on their carers allowance in 2020. The Department will say that overall only 1% of claims are appealed annually, but they are disproportionately within claims for those living with or caring for those with disabilities. Minister, I have no idea why the people with autism and their families are continuously asked to wait. wait a year or 19 months, or in most cases several years for assessment of needs, for provision of services or ASD places. It has been 16 years since the Education for Persons with Special Education Needs Act of 2004, and it is still not fully implemented. They cannot be asked to wait any longer for us to take action. Again, I finish by thanking the Labour for bringing forward this motion and strongly urge the Government and the Cabinet that if you're not going to oppose it and if you accept it, to act upon it, because for anything else to do otherwise would be simply disingenuous.
Thank you very much, Deputy Gannon. We move now to Deputy Gino Kenny, on behalf of Solidarity People Before Profit.
And shared in time with Deputy Barry if he's here, so hopefully it's 4 minutes each way. I'd like to welcome the motion today in relation to autism services by the Labour Party. I think it's a very well thought out motion, and nobody could argue with the contents of the motion. And Minister, we, a number of TDs from Dublin Midwest recently met you in relation to ongoing issues around CHO7, which I would represent in Dublin Midwest. And the kind of, it was a quite hopeful meeting, I have to say. And, you know, I will hold my counsel until then, but CHO7 has one of the longest waiting lists for basic services for children, and that's one of the longest, one of the highest in the country. So I don't doubt your bona fides in trying to challenge that and address that for the many families, not only in CHO7 but across the country. And this issue has been raised countless times, Minister, in my 5 years tenure here. I just want to go back to 14, 15 months ago. And I'm not talking about the pandemic, I'm talking about the general election that took place on the 8th of February. And that general election, you know, the voice of the people spoke. And one of the narrative of that general election was an earthquake in some ways. The narrative of that general election was that the incumbent government and previous governments had not delivered on public services. When you really kind of drill down on the reason why there was such a kind of seismic kind of change in that election, it was public health and services when people needed them in time of need, they weren't there. And I think people had cracked and people wanted something very, very different. And I think that the pandemic has compounded a lot of you know, historical inequalities in Ireland. And one of them inequalities is about intervention and around autism and the services that, you know, people should get, but they can't. You know, waiting like 2 years, 3 years for basic services for children, speech and language and physiotherapy, it's just not acceptable, absolutely unacceptable in 21st century Ireland. And even, I mean, it's incredible, like, you know, the Disability Act from 2005 stipulates that a child, when they get assessed, it should take 6 months before that assessment takes place, and, you know, possibly they get the services. But there has been numerous cases and ongoing cases in the High Court at the moment where families are bringing the state in breach of this Disability Act. Now, that's a stain on this government and previous governments. Because what families are looking for, and we've all got them phone calls, extremely distressing phone calls, where family members cannot get the basic services for the child. And it's, you know, sometimes you feel useless, you know, when you say, look, I'll make a phone call or send an email, but I know what the answer is going to be, and that answer is going to be, you're going to be waiting probably up to 2 years. It's really kind of, it's heartbreaking for the families. So what these families want is better outcomes and better services. They're basic things. They're very, very basic things. And hopefully, Minister, with your tenure here, in the time that you're a minister, that you will address of some of them very, very kind of real issues that really kind of impact deeply, deeply on families when they need services the most. And ASD units have been a very big success in Ireland, but there's not enough. There's an over subscribing of ASD units, not only in Dublin Midwest, but obviously in other parts of the state. And they're really, really good with engaging with children, and the whole environment is brilliant. But we need more, and we need more kind of them settings, because better outcomes, early intervention, it's a no-brainer. They have better results. So, Minister, as I said, I hope in your tenure as Minister for this area that you will address the deep inequalities in relation to this. And I think you will. I do believe that you will. But that the proof is, I mean, sometimes that in motions and because sometimes this can be in theatre sometimes. But the real kind of progress is when families don't have to ring people like us. They don't have to ring people like families shouldn't be contacting us for basic services. They shouldn't be. Let's be honest. They should be getting that service in time, not 2 years, but when it's there. And that's all families are asking. So hopefully, at the end of this process, that families, once and for all, can get them services that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Kenny, for that thoughtful contribution. Your colleague is not here, so we go on, and our next contributors are Deputy Sean Kenny sharing with Deputy Verona Murphy. Deputy Kenny.
Thank you very much, Ken Corla, and I do welcome the opportunity to speak on this very important issue. I think, in fact, that it's very timely because this is Autism Month. I think autism and autistic citizens have been let down by us here in this state collectively. And I support the motion that's here this evening. I think it's timely. I think it follows on from the bill which the regional group and I reintroduced or reinstated in the Dáil yesterday. And this bill, which is called the Autism Spectrum Disorder Bill, was introduced by Senator James Riley in the last Dáil. It passed the Seanad and is now back in the order paper for the Dáil. And the purpose of the bill is to address the inconsistency which exists across the state in respect of both the availability of services and the type of services which are accessible to children and adults with autism spectrum disorder. The bill is to provide for the development and implementation of a cross-departmental, multi-agency autism spectrum disorder strategy. Such a strategy would set out how the needs of persons with autism spectrum disorder are to be addressed throughout their lives. The bill also provides for the strategy. It will decide on the content of the strategy. It will assign responsibility for its implementation. It will provide a transparent process for monitoring the implementation of the strategy. And it also provides guidance on the implementation of the strategy. The bill will also provide for the collation of data on autism spectrum disorder and also provides for the initiation of a public awareness campaign on autism spectrum disorder. And I must say, Ken Corla, and say, Ministers, that what I've heard in this debate this evening can all be covered in this bill. This bill can be enacted fairly quickly. It can be taken on by government and brought through. It had, in the last Dáil, full support of every party and got through the Seanad. There may be amendments that have to be made to it, and we can do that. As a public representative since 2004, and I've stated this in the Disability Matters Committee, but for the record I'll state it now, there are some things you come across in public life, as Deputy Gino Kenny referred to, where you feel you're not very proud of what's going on. And I do believe that autism and the citizens who have autism have been let down by this state, and I'm not very proud of that. So my plea this evening is cross-party plea, is for us to, I heard earlier, empowerment by action. And the best action we can make is to implement this bill without any delay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Kenny. Deputy Verona Murphy.
Thank you, Ken Corla. And I'd like to thank my Labour colleagues for bringing the motion to the floor. It further endorses the reintroduction of the Autism Spectrum Disorder Bill of 2017, which, as my colleague just said, was originally presented to the House by James O'Reilly, and yesterday Deputy Sean Canny, along with myself and the regional group and my colleagues who co-signed it. So I will hope that the bill and this motion get cross-party support also to enact and fast-track the dire need for supports to ASD sufferers and their families. I'd like to discuss a little-known method, but a hugely successful method of dealing with non-verbal autism sufferers. It's called Rapid Prompting Method, or RPM. Now, RPM gives non-verbal autistic sufferers a voice using digital word spelling to deliver the message. And I spoke to Owen O'Donegan, who is the principal of Kilran National School in Rosslare. Kilran National School have a special needs autism unit and they use RPM, but it's not funded by any department. It's funded by Kilran National School Special Needs Group, whose time and generosity knows no bounds. Count Corley in 2014, Senator Ronan Mullen in 2014 asked that RPM be promoted, funded and targeted at children with autism, and the answer was no. But now, Count Corley, the need has never been greater. COVID has been a total disaster, far in excess of other families for those with autistic children. But the government's reaction by instituting the longest lockdown in Europe, if not the world, has destroyed, and there's no other word that can describe the effects of the lockdown. It utterly destroyed any semblance of normality, routine, or progress made by families for years to come. The rest of the country may look forward to opening up, but not these families. The regression of ASD sufferers will take years to repair. Now, the government owes it to these children and their families to provide, at the very least, a funded piloted programme on RPM, Rapid Prompting Method. And I'm asking the Minister, whom I agree with all of my previous deputies who have said about Minister Rabbitte, she's hardworking, she knows her job and she is not afraid to get the results from her department. And I commend her for that. And I know how hard she works and I know the engagement that I've had with her and the progress that we've made. So I do have faith that the Minister will drive this. But unfortunately in Wexford today, I've been in touch with a family, a mother of a 10-year-old boy. Unable to now access CAMS, he has ASD and has been put on medication, which is successful, but he is 10 years old and he weighs 13 stone. And he has tried to take his own life. His mother is also suffering, feeling like a failure. But she hasn't failed her child. She saved her child's life. It is the system that has failed them both, and it has to stop. I'm asking the Minister, wholeheartedly pleading to help these families. Don't continue to ignore their needs. Please, don't just support the motion. Support the Autism Spectrum Disorder Bill also, but get the strategy going. Please, Minister. Thank you, Count Corley.
Thank you very much, Deputy Murphy. We move now to Deputy McGrath, sharing with Deputy Collins. Deputy Collins is up first.
Thank you very much, Concordia. Parents, Minister, of children with autism and intellectual disabilities dual diagnosis do not feel represented by Inclusion Ireland at talks and implementation of strategies. They feel underrepresented, as each party do not understand or cater for autism or intellectual disabilities. Rather, each supports one or the other. The challenges of these dual diagnoses is not highlighted enough, and the consequences leave vulnerable families, Minister, unheard and left to manage solo, which has a huge impact on the family's well-being as a whole. The new Restructuring of services has put a full stop to any services families have received from the public supports, even though very little. One child, Jack, has been self-harming since last January, hitting himself in the head daily. 1 year later, they are waiting for him to be seen by the Brothers of Charity, Psychology and CAMHS, leaving these desperate parents for support in the interim. However, there is no physiotherapist in Ireland psychiatrist in Ireland who will see a child with Jack's diagnosis if they are under 18. They have to be seen by CAMHS, who are clearly understaffed. The result, another child and family left to try and cope with the reality of watching a child turn on themselves violently. There are still children in the wrong school settings across Ireland. Children with autism diagnosis that need a special class need to settle for mainstream children in special classes with autism and intellectual disabilities in a special class who need a special school place. These children regress and suffer identity issues as well as mental health issues as a result of their misplacement. Staff try their best to support their needs but struggle due to the lack of support and services and training. Jack and Friends was opened, Minister, in 2019 in Bandon, West Cork, supporting 60 families and are now supporting 300 in Cork. They do not have any paid staff. They are all voluntary and offer free counselling to parents, affordable occupational therapy and speech and language therapy to children through arranging bag packs and bucket collections. They are all parents of children with complex needs, carrying out this fundraising to keep the premises they rent at £1,000 per month open. They offer weekly social groups for children which build their self-esteem and confidence amongst their peers in a safe and accepting environment. They are an affiliated charity of the National Federation of Arts Friendship Clubs for Special Needs, who support 40 clubs around Ireland. They were keeping their heads above water just about above water prior to the pandemic, and just about through hard work and word and dedication, but they are now struggling financially to survive and keep this vital service going. And I would plead with you, Minister, that maybe you could help here in some manner too, because this is a massive catchment that they're looking after in Bandon and surrounds. They cannot apply for funding as a sub-club, so they could not avail of any supports the government issued for profits the past year. They needed a door to stay open. They need help. July provision, Minister, is a welcome and necessary provision for children with needs. However, a vast majority of schools do not run this provision in-house. This results in families seeking suitable teachers to carry out the hours with their children in their family home. A child with autism would benefit far more from remaining in their school environment to avail of these hours. We asked you, the Department of Education, also to carry out, I would say, the July provision compulsory for schools to execute. And it is important that this would happen in the school. As I said, that the home environment is something that is more difficult for the children with autism. I suppose we all know families with autism, and they have a very, very difficult, lot of difficulties. And I would plead again with you that you look at the Bandon Autism Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Collins. Deputy McGrath.
I too want to compliment the Party-elect Deborah for bringing this motion here this evening, and anybody who tries to help with autism. And I wish the Minister well, but there are some shocking figures, and when I was studying this, I think that we've spent over 8,000 recently on consultants and advisors, on consultants, Delight and Tusha and others. And to think that there are 5,918 waiting for an assessment. The trauma, the stress, the anxiety and the fear and the desperation that parents go through with autistic children. Some families have more than one, maybe a number of them. And it's so heart-rending, and we feel so powerless as elected representatives. And to think that, a town the size of Clonmel had no autism unit up till recently. And I salute the Board of Management and the teachers and the unions and the teachers who have come forward and come out. We had 2 units that set up by Mr. Ryan, the Private that was for preschool. We had none then for national school or for secondary school. But we have now a wonderful unit in the high school in Clonmel, operated there by Paddy O'Gorman and Breed Wilkinson. And exceptional under the excellent tuition of their principal in the school. We have one now in my own school in Coshlan Nua. We have a new one in Burncourt National School, and 2 being constructed at present in Clara National School. And they're rushing them out. The needs are there, and as I said, I salute all the people with special needs and the people that go into that vocation to care and give love and care to those lovely, beautiful children. I want to say also that I salute Nick Ryan Purcell, a hero from Nina, a young man with huge, huge talents, and the way he has made a short film and came into this house here and showed it in the AV room, and has gone all over Europe showing his film and talking openly. And he's now going out and doing wonderful artist paintings and putting up wonderful scenes on Facebook and social media. I salute him, and I salute his mother, and I salute all the mothers and the parents, because it's a challenge. My own late brother, he was a paediatrician. He was very, very interested and keen in all those issues of autism and dyslexia and all those special needs. He had a particular love for it, and his big loss to his family, but to the patients who loved him. Look, we could do so much more. And we have to cut out the red tape, and we have to cut out the taking of notes and notes and notes and notes. And when we see it in an expose recently where the notes were taken just to fight court cases, the amount of money to fight these cases, just put all our energies together with passion and with vision and try and build these units and have more of them. And we also have to look and examine why is there so much autism appearing and symptoms of autism in young children. And so we have to question that. Something has changed, because when I was in school, maybe there were a number there, but it wasn't apparent, and it wasn't certainly to me, and maybe I was wrong. But it's I won't say an epidemic is a wrong word to say, but it's hugely worrying. And people come to me, and teachers have come to me and said, well, we have to investigate the causes. But look, it's here. Thankfully, we can diagnose it now, and I salute the people that do diagnose it, but the waiting lists are so traumatic. And the last 14 months have been so traumatic. And I had parents ringing me when their children were incarcerated, their daily trip to the special school, on the bus, and to the playgrounds or whatever, and they couldn't have it. And untold regression has taken place in autistic and people with special needs. And I think it's time we open the gates and let them out and let them live, and we support them in the community. As I said, I wish everyone well that tries to make an effort in the right way here. Forget the consultants. Take out the barristers and the legal challenges. Deal with it sensitively and compassionately, and we'll be a better country for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy McGrath. We go now to Deputy Marion Harkin on behalf of the Independent Group.
Thank you, Can Corla. First of all, I want to thank the Labour Party for bringing forward this most important motion on autism strategy and autism services. I fully support its recommendations, and I'm very pleased to hear the Minister say that she too is supportive. Now, all of us know from speaking with parents and carers the intolerable burdens that have been placed on families and caregivers over the last 14 months. And on top of that, waiting lists have increased for many services during that time. As politicians, we all receive heart-rending emails and phone calls. But perhaps one of the most difficult is when a parent who is advocating for their child, and when they see the life chances of their child diminishing in front of their eyes, when they see their children moving backwards because they can't access maybe speech and language therapy, or they can't access physiotherapy, or they can't access occupational therapy or other services that the child so badly needs. That's the most difficult phone call. One parent said to me they spent a great deal of time and energy on assessment, and when finally that assessment is finished, there's no or very few services. Now, Minister, I have 4 different emails here, and I expect you have many, but these are from different parents, and I received them in the last week alone. Each one tells a unique but a similar story. I'll just quote part of one of the emails because as we both know, the voice of the parent is much stronger and more powerful than anything I could say, and I've changed names to preserve anonymity. My son Michael has Down syndrome and autism. He has a fabulous personality, is full of life and mischief, and brings joy to his siblings and to us, his parents. The biggest barrier we face in raising our child with autism is his lack of access to speech therapy. Michael is non-verbal, and this can cause frustration for everyone and directly impacts his ability to learn and become a functioning, included member of society. For the past 5 years, myself and a group of parents in Sligo have been fighting for an appropriate level of therapy to be provided for all our children. We have been met with barriers and excuses from the HSE at every turn. And the next sentence is shocking, but she wrote it. She said, "The disdain and disrespect that has been shown by some," underlined, "some of the managers in the HSE is nothing short of disgraceful. It feels like we are looked down upon and should be thankful for anything we get." Now, I spoke to her and she emphasised that that's just some. Many will do everything they can, but they don't have the resources. Personally, I can only imagine how difficult it must be to work under those circumstances, and how can you provide a decent, humane, accessible service if you don't have the resources. But she says, "I could count on one hand the individual speech therapy sessions my son has had in the last 5 years." Just one other sentence from another parent, and I think she sums it up perfectly when she says, "Some of the issues I have found in being a parent of a child with autism is the lack of quality, continuous service." Now, there are positives in these emails. They speak very highly of their local school and how, in many ways, the school has been the glue that held everything together. But on foot of these queries and others, I put down questions to the Minister for Health regarding the numbers of children in Sligo and Leitrim that are currently awaiting assessment, treatment or therapy. 385 children are awaiting initial assessment. 84 are awaiting therapy and 444 are awaiting further speech and language therapy. Now, Minister, Sligo and Leitrim are two small counties and they are shocking numbers. Now, to be fair, the response from the HSE did say that some measures were being undertaken to reduce those lists, and that's positive. But the waiting lists are so long that these extra measures will hardly keep pace with the demand, never mind cut the waiting lists. And part of the problem seems to be the difference between positions or posts allocated to Sligo, Leitrim, and positions filled. Going back to speech and language therapists, 40% of the positions are unfilled. And there are similar situations pertaining to social work, physiotherapy and occupational therapy. Not as stark, but somewhere between 10 and 25% vacancy. These vacancy rates must be dealt with as a matter of urgency. It's soul-destroying for those who need to access the service, and it places intolerable burdens on those who are trying to provide the service. Now, before I came in, I actually got 3 phone calls because people knew I was going to speak about autism. But one particular comment from a mother stayed with me. She has a 14-year-old boy, and she spoke of her 14-year-old struggle. And I won't go through what she said, but she was most reasonable. But she's worn out and she's worn out, and especially on the lack of speech and language therapy. And she told me she's listened to promises, to HSE managers, to politicians, and she politely says, I don't want to hear your voices. I want to hear my son's voice. And I think that says it all. Finally, Minister, I know you are working hard to improve an extremely difficult situation. But just before I finish, can I emphasise to you once again the unacceptably long waiting lists for CAMHS. Families, teachers, carers are driven demented, looking at children regressing, fearing for their safety and, in cases, their lives, and yet they can't access CAMHS. I'm told a 15-month waiting list for it, and I mean, people have been told that the only way to access CAMHS is to go to the local accident and emergency unit in the local hospital. Minister, you and I know that's plain wrong. So I'm just asking that you give your very best consideration to the extra resources and staff needed to provide a decent CAMHS service, and I think you will. Thank you, Minister.
Many thanks, Deputy Harkin. We move now to Minister Josepha Madigan.
Ceann Comhairle, tá buíoch as an deis leabhar tanacht faoin dul chun cinn atá déanta a gcuin le déanaí. This week marks the final days of Autism Awareness Month, and it is appropriate that we take stock of the progress that has been made and the work that still has to be done. And having listened to the sincere views of members this evening, I believe we are all committed to ensuring the rights of all children are fully vindicated. And we know that education is a right for our children. The right of autistic children to access education is no different. Education is about empowerment and ensuring that a child can reach her or his full potential. It is the greatest tool of social mobility that we have, and as Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And since my appointment as Minister for Special Education and Inclusion, I have met teachers, SNAs, school staff and families who are committed to the values of education and work day in and day out so that the educational rights of children with additional needs are fully vindicated and validated. Government is also rightly playing its part, and tonight's motion is an opportunity to remind ourselves of the work done to date and what still needs to be done. In 2004, the Education for Persons with Special Educational Needs Act demonstrated that government was committed to a new approach to special education. These foundations have been built upon over intervening years. And today, supports for students with additional needs are offered more and more on a needs basis rather than a diagnostic one. And this guarantees that support will be provided to all students with additional needs, whether they are in a position to access a diagnosis or not. And since 2011, the number of special classes in mainstream schools has increased by almost 235%, from 548 to 1,836 for this school year of 2020-2021. And of these, 1,567 special classes cater for autistic students. 197 new special classes have been established nationally for the current school year, of which approximately 189 are new ASD special classes, comprising 12 early intervention, 113 primary and 64 post-primary ASD classes. This year, we are recruiting an additional 1,000 special needs assistants, bringing the total number of special needs assistants in the country to a record high of over 18,000. We have announced 3 new special schools over the past 2 years, the first new special schools in many years, demonstrating, Ceann Comhairle, the important role that these schools play in our education system and our commitment to them. I also secured a dedicated school reopening package for special education consisting of enhanced cleaning and PPE for schools, catering for students with additional needs, and the recruitment of 17 additional NEPS psychologists. And significantly, I secured a budget of over €2 billion for the area of special education, which represents over 1/5 of the total annual budget for the Department of Education. And I want to build on this progress because I know there is still so much work that needs to be done. So we are recruiting an additional 400 teachers dedicated to students with additional needs across mainstream schools and special schools to ensure that inclusion is at the heart of our education system. We are progressing the school inclusion model with the aim of providing important therapy supports in school settings for the first time ever. This promises to be a transformational moment in mainstream special education, and as part of the rollout, I have secured funding for 80 additional therapists to be recruited by the NCSC. We are working to create 1,200 additional special class places for this September for those students who need them. The resources have been secured for this, and the intensive engagement with schools across the country is well underway. And I've also ensured that from this year, arrangements are in place for facilities for special classes to be included in all new school bills. The NCSC is also developing a 5-year forecasting tool which incorporates population demographics information from the department's forward planning section. And these forecasts are shared with the Planning and Building Unit in order to include planning for special class accommodation in all major projects. NEPS, along with the Inspectorate, the NCSC and Middletown Centre for Autism and the Department of Education have developed best practice guidelines for schools on supporting students with autism. These guidelines are currently being finalised, and an implementation plan will be developed to support schools with their implementation over the coming years. This will be a resource for schools to support the needs of students with autism and will assist school staff to understand the varied needs of and nature of those needs, as well as to identify whole school and individualised approaches to intervention. This progress is important to acknowledge. It is also important to take stock of where we are 17 years after the passage of the Epson Act in 2004, given the increased investment and development of policies since then. We know that several sections of that Act still remain to be commenced by the Minister for Education, and as a result, I would like to state my commitment to a full review of the provisions of the Epson Act to see where updates are needed and how its provisions can be best enacted to meet the needs of young people with additional needs. I can also confirm that the Government is committed to consulting with stakeholders on how best to progress aspects of the Epson Act on a non-statutory basis. And this work will help us guarantee that special education provision fully meets the needs of young people in Ireland. Ensuring that the voice of the child is at the heart of policy making in this area is something else to which I'm absolutely committed. I recently met with Emma, a young woman from my constituency who spoke about her own personal experiences of education as an autistic person and the importance of hearing autistic voices at the decision-making table and learning from their experiences. She spoke very eloquently, as did others, and she's absolutely correct. Empowerment is at the heart of education, and gone are the paternalistic days where rights and protections were handed down from on high as though they were gifts or favours. In the 21st century, it is vital that the voice of a young person is heard as part of policy making. I will be working with officials to explore new ways of ensuring that this is the case. As part of this, I am pleased to announce that a new departmental consultation group is being formed with advocacy organisations in the area of special education, and this new forum is vital in giving a voice to young people with additional needs as an important partner in education. Ceann Comhairle, it's important to recognise that the past year has been an incredibly difficult period for young people with additional needs. COVID-19 imposed school closures have had the greatest impact on young people who need in-person education, and many of these young people were not able to fully participate in remote learning. I have heard countless stories from young people and their families about how this impacted their lives, with the fear of regression and loss of key skills a constant feature of this period. It is for this reason that Government, at my urging, confirmed that special education was a priority as part of a school reopening, and we have said all along that special education is an essential service and that students with additional needs do best in school in person. And though it took longer than we would otherwise have wished, special schools and special classes reopened first in advance of the wider education system. A supplementary provision was put in place to provide one-to-one in-person education for students with additional needs in mainstream education, and special education still remains a priority for this Government. And as part of this prioritisation, I am committed to the provision of an expanded summer programme for special education this summer. This programme will build on the expanded programme that was in place last year and ensure that as many students as possible with additional needs will be able to benefit from in-person education over the summer in order to prevent regression, build key skills and confidence, and make up for the missed time earlier in the year. And we are also working with school bodies and staff representatives so that take-up of this year's summer programme is as large as possible for the benefit of all. And work on this is at an advanced stage, and I hope to announce further details on this matter soon. Ceann Comhairle, this Government's commitment to special education is clear, from the resources being allocated and the progress being made. And as ever, our focus is and must always be the young persons themselves. And over recent weeks and months, we have heard the voices of these young people and their families speak about their experiences, and we must now make sure that the post-COVID-19 Ireland is a place where the needs and rights of young people with additional needs are to the fore more than ever. And this will be my mantra. Curmish Cuige Lemishnach Ceann Comhairle, Gurmila Mahagat.
Agus gur maithagat racham iad roig anis an céad caint óir eile ná an seachta Brendan Howland agus é grainte chuidama leis an seachta Jed Nash.
Gur magat Ceann Comhairle agus tásúla go méid misneach ag an rialtas agus ag an ara stáit le gníomh atá roing ile. The issue of autism demands the attention of this House. That has been made abundantly clear by the contribution of every member who have spoken, and I'm very grateful to them all in support of the Labour Party motion. And I think I should make mention of the fact that there are 3 members of the government present, and I think that underscores, and I'm very grateful for it, the regard the government has for the importance of the issue of autism as one of the issues of our time that demands urgent and real attention. And it demands from each of us a real effort to understand this issue. And all of us, and I put myself into this space, are grappling to fully understand the issues and then to provide the supports for people with autism and their families that they absolutely require. Members have referenced their own interactions with people, and I have received many. But I have a 4-page typed letter from a friend of mine, and I want to just read a couple of paragraphs of it into the record of the House. My daughter was diagnosed recently and has failing mental health, especially since she reached 16. She's learning to cope and is making progress, not necessarily linear, but progress all the same. She lives at home with us, and her routine in her life that holds something for her. We've been able to cope. However, when it comes to my other daughter, it is safe to say we could, in the last 2.5 years, write a book. This is a family with 2 children with autism. Between February and November 2016, she had 2 significant periods of hospitalisation. However, we were never given a full diagnosis of her condition. She was reluctant to leave her room, spending most of her time sitting under her school desk to the point of sleeping there most nights. Excessive amounts of time spent on schoolwork for the junior cert, perfectionism, singular black and white thinking, isolating herself from her family, and finally self-harming. It truly is heartbreaking, and there are so many stories like it. Access to residential units, the parent goes on in the letter to say, is problematic for those who live in regions like the southeast or north of a line from Dublin to Galway. That's just not right. And those incredible difficulties have been compounded by COVID-19. I think there's a resolve in this House from everybody that I've listened to that we must do better. And we must start not only with the Department of Education that we've heard from, but also with the Department of Health. Our motion states that the long-standing adversarial approach, the mindset of resistance, must change. That mindset of resistance must be replaced by a mindset of assistance. And the practice in the Department of Health of surreptitiously compiling dossier of sensitive personal information from medical and other healthcare and educational sources on children with autism must be condemned. It is unacceptable, but it also gives us a window into the improper relationship between the nation's Department of Health and the nation's most vulnerable citizens. Our motion calls for a fully independent review, commissioned by a body other than the Department of Health, into this particular practice. I don't think anything else will be acceptable, and I hope that that will be agreed. The motion is a very comprehensive one, but at its heart, it calls for a national autism empowerment strategy. I know, Ceann Comhairle, we talked about an autism committee of this House, timelined to do that. Let us use tonight and the support of all members, and I think the buy-in very strongly of government and the ministers here present, to finally address this with the resources and the understanding that this real issue requires.
Thank you, Deputy Howland. Deputy Nash.
Thank you very much, Ceann Comhairle. Ministers, I think we've had a very constructive discussion here this evening. It has been a very unifying process, I think. But every testimony we have heard this evening from my Labour colleagues and others represents a life and a family that the state has sadly failed. And it's an indictment of all of us, quite frankly. A failure to make early interventions that can transform lives, a failure to assess, a failure to invest, a failure to support families and carers, a failure to prioritise, a failure often to just provide the humanity and the basic, simple compassion we ought to expect from a state and a society that trades on a well-honed reputation for justice and humanitarianism. This is not how things should be in a rich and diverse republic. We are a republic in name only if we fail to meet, time and again, as we do, the threshold of decency and egalitarianism for all of our citizens. And nowhere have we failed more than in our approach to the rights of citizens who have autism. There has been a growing awareness of autism and an understanding of it in recent years, but this has sadly not been met with a corresponding change to meet the escalation of unmet needs. Now, the history of the state's treatment of autistic people is a catalogue of failure and disregard. I recall myself in the early 2000s, the hope that was generated by the prospect of the then government trailing what would be a rights-based approach to a new Disability Act. And at that stage, and in a previous life, Ceann Comhairle, I worked alongside key advocacy groups and the National Disability Authority on the campaign to have new legislation that would transform our approach to disabilities and the rights of disabled people. But that government unfortunately resiled from its initial promise to put human rights and a right to basic services at the very heart of our laws. The Disability Act of 2005 turned out to be another false dawn in a long list of false dawns for some of our most vulnerable citizens. Now, because of harsh experience, the expectations of citizens and campaigners are low. One of the most sobering things, I think, to have emerged from the revelations around the keeping of dossiers in the Department of Health is that none of us are any longer surprised. And those who are the least surprised are autistic citizens themselves and their families and advocates. Now, when you wake up every morning and every day involves a battle with the state and its agencies to get the assessments, interventions and supports you need to get a decent shot at the kind of life I have the privilege of being able to take for granted, nothing the state might do will come as a shock. And this really is an indictment of all of us as legislators. I regret to say that for all too many autistic citizens and disabled citizens, they have been met with hostility and crucifying bureaucracy if they have the audacity to insist on the services that they really should be entitled to as of right. Now, I note your plans, Minister, and I note the plans of Minister Madigan and the presence here this evening of the Minister for Children, Roderick O'Gorman. That is a powerful statement in itself, a statement of support in terms of what we are all trying to achieve in the best interests of those we all represent. We've heard the defence of the government's record, we've heard much of this before, and I don't doubt your compassion, Minister, and the compassion of other ministers, but compassion alone won't change things, and neither will a mere tinkering around the edges. Yes, additional investment and resources are of course required, and that's welcome, but what will make a real long-term difference is a paradigm shift and a complete change of culture that puts the autistic person at the very heart of the planning and decision-making processes that will determine how they live their lives. We must empower. That is an important word, and we must move beyond words and translate that into actions. Now, one important way in which we could achieve a potentially transformational change of direction is by taking our inspiration from Malta, as referenced by Deputy Éireann earlier on. Their 2016 Persons within the Autism Spectrum Act is pioneering. It provides for, among other things, the establishment of an Autism Advisory Council to advise and guide government on autism strategy. Our Climate Action Advisory Council holds government's feet to the fire on climate. And, Minister, I think we should enable the experts in this area, autistic people, their families and advocates, to design strategy and hold all of us to account on autism. And I would plead with you, Minister, in the work that you are doing, to have the confidence in your own work to enable that to happen, to move along with them in step. Now, Minister, I note you're not opposing the motion. There is a difference, of course, though, between opposing a motion and supporting it. We want action to be taken to deliver on the very central tenets of this motion in the interests of all of those we represent. Now, your government has, in this term, a history of supporting Labour Party motions. We did the job for you on remote working. We did the job for you on sick pay. We're now doing the job for you on this particular issue, which has been a real problem in our society for far too long. We are asking you not just to not oppose the motion, but to back it. And I trust that you will do that and use your good offices to move forward on it, to resource this area and to work to empower individuals with autism in our society to be the best they can, to be full, active citizens, be the best they can and to contribute as best they can to our society in this republic.
Thank you very much.